What's good, everybody? Recently, I shared material on my YouTube channel in the community section in form of texts about spiritual warfare, about angels, and I emphasize on the Jungian interpretation because Carl Gustav Jung, based on the work of Nietzsche, shows us the psychological background of spirituality and religion in form of archetypes, the concept of archetypes within the collective subconsciousness. So it creates a full circle from philosophy over spirituality and religion to psychology. So it's one circle, you know. It all emanates from our mind, our DNA, our culture, collective experiences, and so on. It's all coming from us, right? All right. So one of these posts that I recently shared started with this part from Ephesians, from the Bible. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. Maybe I didn't get it right, but not perfect, but you know what I'm talking about. And you need to follow me and hit the like button so you don't miss this type of content if it resonates with you. All right, so the thing is, we need to understand when we read things like that in the Bible, and or we inform ourselves about the ministry of angels and what angels are there, and so how to use them. The thing is, it's all about the visualization. There is something that I call the manifestation mafia because I mistrust these manifestors on YouTube and on social media. But all of them agree that visualization is important. I mean, of course, one of the most important things in life, definitely, and this is not manifestation mafia, basics is important. What do you eat? How much do you sleep? You know, psychologic and physical hygiene and so on. These are the basics, the absolute basics of life. Food, sunlight, water, movement, connection to nature. This is basics. But visualization can also be important to change your mindset, because it's all about the mindset, okay? So this is why it can help you to change your status of mind, your mindset. And now I have to make a small interruption into the topic, but it will make sense. A user asked me, someone who's following me on YouTube, we got confused about shared fantasy. What is shared fantasy? When you come from the background of narcissistic abuse, shared fantasy is in a negative light. It's a negative connotation because the narcissist lives in a delusion, in a shared fantasy. He is lost in the shared fantasy. There is no reality for the narcissist. They live in a shared fantasy. It's malignant, it's delusional, all right? And the narcissist only acts based on the shared fantasy, and therefore it is very bad for you to be exposed to a person who is acting based on a delusion permanently, because you will second guess yourself, your sanity, all right? It's an insane person, and therefore shared fantasy is a very disturbing experience if you come from narcissistic abuse environment. But as many things that narcissists have in a pathological way, extreme form, malignant form, sick form, It is something that everybody has. Therefore, narcissists can also hide very well in plain sight, because they say, you know what, shared fantasy is just human, it's just normal. Yes, it's normal. Healthy people have it too, but they can distinguish between the shared fantasy and reality. They can distinguish between object relations and introject relation. All right, you understand? This means they can distinguish between the representation of a person that they have in their own psyche and the external reality of this person, but this goes too deep now. So shared fantasy is your self-concept, and after the narcissistic abuse, we should not stop having fantasies about ourselves and self-concepts. We have to remove the negative sides that the narcissists try to implant in us, okay? So we should keep on having positive self-concepts and fantasies. We can even be grandiose. Our grandiosity is not rooted in a delusion. It has to be rooted in reality, and we have to understand that every self-concept is basically a fantasy, and that's okay. But this way we don't have to feel attacked if somebody attacks our ego and self-concept, because we know, well, yeah, it is a fantasy, it is my ego, but I don't care. I don't get into this competitive loop that narcissists use to extract energy and reactions and attention from us. I don't care. I don't give a shit. This person has a fragile self, all right? Therefore, they have to use these strategies to validate themselves, and they have to devalue others. And it's deeply disturbing to see a person that does this, that really brings nothing to the table, yet starts to compete in a pathological way. So yeah, that's a narcissist. Anyway, so fantasy and shared fantasy is something very healthy. It is the loving relationship that you have to yourself in the first place, but it can also be a loving relationship to another person with a shared fantasy. Therefore, it's shared. You share it with yourself when you're an aware, reflected person, but you also share it with another person. And when you now read things in the Bible like Ephesians, what I quoted, we not wrestle with flesh and blood, and so on, you need to know, well, what do we wrestle then with? And if it is spiritual wickedness and principalities and powers, then, well, what are these powers that we wrestle with? And what are principalities? And you can educate yourself about that. And if a principality is like a gatekeeper, it's like a fallen angel or a demonic force that is guarding a gate. It's a gatekeeper. And you want to, you know, when you do shadow work, when you want to change something that has never been changed in your life before, well, let me try to get this right here. Then the visualization can help you, because then you see, you can visualize this principality being a gatekeeper, trying to hold you back from something that belongs to you, that helps you to elevate, right? To make a spiritual and to make a progress, a certain progress. You understand me? So therefore, it's important to understand that all of that, what is in the Bible, you can see it as something happening in your in your psyche, in your psychological background, right? And translate it. So when you see that you wrestle with a principality and you need to get past this gatekeeper to get your blessings, something that is for you, then you understand this better, what is meant by spiritual warfare and so on. Anyway, my time is over. See you in the next video. Wagwan. Yeah, what I wanted to tell you, visualization is important, and to understand shared fantasy is important. Just because the narcissist's fantasy is malignant and all-pervasive and delusional does not mean that fantasy is bad. It's the same as with the psychopath. Just because the psychopath's shared fantasy is only invested in a goal. Being goal-oriented is not bad just because the psychopath is only goal-oriented. In other words, just because we experienced the sickness of a delusional, grandiose fantasy of a narcissist, or the indifferent, goal-driven callousness of a psychopath, dude, this fuck. Yeah, just because we experienced it, it doesn't mean it's bad. In other words, we also need some little bit of being goal-driven. We also need fantasy in a healthy way, right? Jesus Lord, this thing, I don't know, it's broke big time. It's broken big time. This thing is broken big time. Yeah. Okay, fuck it.